Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the London Stock Exchange Spark session on cybersecurity. The LSE Spark Thought Leadership Programme has plenty of webinars, blogs, and podcasts, so please continue to check the website, tune in for recordings of prior sessions and future live events like this one. My name is Charles Clark. I work in the cybersecurity team here at London Stock Exchange Group, and I'll be the panel moderator today. To kick things off, I'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, then we'll launch into some pre-prepared questions. While we're going through the pre-prepared questions, we have a Slido up on screen so the audience can ask questions on topics that they wish to discuss. So firstly, I'd like to ask Alan to introduce himself.
Thanks very much, Charles. It's great to be here this afternoon. So I'm Alan Platt and I'm CEO of CyberHive. CyberHive is a cybersecurity tech company founded by myself and my business partner, David Blundell, who's really the technical brains behind what we do. And we've been around for about 6 years now, but actually David's experience in cloud computing and security in particular goes back many decades. And we recognize really that traditional approaches to security have some limitations. So we pride ourselves in doing things a little bit differently. And bit of an introduction, basically, we believe that most cyber products are looking for bad behaviors in traffic, in servers, etc. And they're looking for malware and bespoke hacking attempts, etc. But we feel it's always a bit of a race with the bad guys. So as fast as endpoint protection companies are able to pick up new attacks and shut them down, cyber criminals are coming up with increasingly inventive ways to break in. And even so-called AI techniques can't really keep up. Traditional cybersecurity is a bit like a wrapper around IT, trying to protect it from outside threats. And the problem is that approach finds it hard to detect problems that start inside your fortifications, things like human error. And let's face it, we all make mistakes. So instead of taking that track, what CyberHive did is we built in digital security by design from the ground up. Instead of trying to detect bad behaviors, we only allow known good things to happen. And that allows us to detect and prevent bad things from happening, even if they're zero-day vulnerability exploits or new attack vectors that the industry just haven't seen this before. So what that actually means for us as a company, we do this using several pieces of unique tech. So we protect servers using our own patented distributed allow listing technology. And we also provide defense in depth by using all of the features and capabilities of AWS and other technologies that allow us to deploy as a security by code approach. We also have communications products, which are, we've developed a mesh software-defined networking tech that implements PQ-resistant tech and cryptography. But not only that, it's much more secure than conventional VPNs, but also by using a zero trust and mesh approach, it's much easier to administer, a lot easier to deploy, and far faster than conventional VPNs or zero trust competitors. So to make that all simple, we built them into a single trusted security platform with 3 principles at its heart. We want everything to be simple to administer, must have great user experience and world-leading security. And we believe our platform provides that through trusted computing through AWS, Azure, or any other provider of your choice, but also really secure connectivity for distributed devices or digital or remote workers. And hopefully we must have something, right? Because it's in use now by governments and they're using it to protect sensitive, secure workloads. And we're growing rapidly following investment for a couple of well-respected investment funds. So I'm really looking forward to talking to the other folks on the panel today and hearing their insights and contributing to the discussion.
Next up, we have Kobe.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My name is Kobe Friedman. I'm the founder and CEO of Findings. I founded the company a few years ago along with my partner, Jonathan Perry. We're based in Israel and in New York, and we are operating globally within the supply chain security automation space. We are coming from the understanding that supply chain cybersecurity attacks became the #1 attack vector in the industry in the last 2 or 3 years. Supply chain, your vendors, your partners, your API connections are a weak spot that the current way that the industry is currently doing risk assessment, audits, monitoring, cannot scale. And we decided to create a solution that will disrupt and change the way that organizations can do risk management among large supply chains, not only on the first tier, but also on the second, third, and so on. So we designed a platform which is basically a decentralized network architecture that enables you, the enterprise, to rapidly deploy a fully customizable vendor risk management program to be able to reach out to all your vendors and to manage the entire risk lifecycle for the engagement between any enterprise and any vendor in any regulatory framework in any jurisdiction, along with the ability to contextualize the observations into your own customized risk framework, your own inherent risk model that can be customized by each participant in the network. Basically, we designed an architecture that enables companies to connect to our platform and to automate the audit process. For example, we are providing vendor cloud security assessment, audits, and continuous monitoring, along with the ability to orchestrate other solutions such as rating, threat intelligence, penetration testing, and all the kind of capabilities required in order to assess or monitor or audit a vendor into one place that can aggregate all your vendors on a continuous basis. So I'm here to represent this side of the world, supply chain, and I'll be happy to participate in the discussion further on. Thank you.
Thanks. Reuven, you're up next.
Okay, so continuing the momentum from Israel. So hi everyone, I'm Rubi Aronashvili. I'm the founder and the CEO of Cy. I started my professional career in the Israeli army. As everyone in Israel, I was part of the founding team of the Israeli Red Team Section 21. That was way back in 2005. Then 2008, I was part of the founding team of the National Incident Response Team, which, this kind of experience actually led me to what I'm doing today. So in Cy, we are trying to solve maybe 3 of the most challenging issues that we see today in the industry. Starting from visibility, how do you make sure that you understand your technical risk profile? That means which kind of attackers are relevant to your organization, how the vulnerabilities that you identify in different platforms, from the cloud, from the internal side of the organization, from identity management, from supply chain, as Kobe mentioned, and so on. How do you get all of those data items into a cohesive place in which you can actually understand how those vulnerabilities are connected together and are able to impact your business in the end? Which leads me to the second problem that we are trying to solve. How do you correlate the technical risk with the business risk and actually quantify the business risk in a way that you are able to make smart decisions, where to invest, how to invest, and what would make most sense to your organization? In the end, we take all of those data items that I mentioned, first the technical risk visibility, and then the business risk quantification, and we put it in a platform, mathematical platform, scientific approach to actually optimize the cybersecurity investment in the organization, which means what are we going to invest in cybersecurity? What will be the return on investment in this part of cybersecurity? And of course, how do you take cybersecurity in general from a cost center to a business enabler in your organization? And that's something that we will discuss also as part of this discussion today. Happy to be here in this very honorable panel. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Reuven. Next up is Jay, please.
Thank you, Charles, and hello, everybody. I'm the CEO of Praxonomy. We're a software as a service company that supplies a portal solution called Board Logic for boards of directors and senior leadership teams at companies, government agencies, and not-for-profits around the world. We help those senior leaders organize their meetings, their documents, and their work around leading the companies. We're not a cybersecurity consulting firm or product firm per se, but we care deeply about cybersecurity issues and best practices, especially as they relate to how board members and senior leaders do their jobs. And we are delighted to be here today. Thank you.
And finally, other Alan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Charles. It's excellent to be here today. I'm Alan Moffatt. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Sapphire. Sapphire is an independent security company. We've been going for 27 years. We work across trust and information security and cybersecurity. As part of this company, we work with our clients and various agencies to ensure that the maturity of their security posture over the years develops in line with their business objectives. We offer anything from working as CISO as a service to go in and engage with the leaders of the organization and take it from a top-down approach, but we also take it right through to governance, compliance, penetration testing, social engineering. In addition to that, we also work with our clients around some of the best products in the marketplace in security, and we offer and be able to not only just to work with them on that, but install and maintain them and offer those services, as well as offer managed services around security operating centres. So basically offer that gambit. But the key thing about SAFA is working as a trusted security partner with our clients to work with their third parties, their IPs, their third party suppliers, to ensure that they're actually all working together to ensure the maturity develops over that period of time. My background, initially within the police side, been in security for a long time. Initially it was a head of ICT, and then moved into the security side. Back in the old days, it was BS 7799 before ISO 27001. And worked all the way through, including on counter-terrorism, working in the police on the national security, critical national infrastructures, writing standards for national infrastructures and building encryption across various different national infrastructures within the policing. So it's just a brief background, and looking forward to with the colleagues on the rest of the panel and going through the discussions today. Thank you, Charles.
Great, thanks a lot all. Those great introductions from everybody, nice and brief. So to set the scene for the rest of the conversation, I'm going to ask each panelist, probably in the same order that we just introduced ourselves, to go in a little bit to what we think the big kind of cybersecurity threats and trends are going to be over 2023. I guess with Alan P kicking off.
Yeah, so if I pick up on that, so I think actually there's quite a lot of trends that we're expecting to see in 2023, but although actually I think from our experience, I think the key problems actually vary a little bit dependent on the sector. So I mentioned previously that actually some of our key customers are government-based customers, and actually for them, the war in Ukraine has raised a lot of security concerns at that kind of level, and critical national infrastructure as well is also something that they're extremely concerned about. So they're basically looking at the potential threats that could come from bad actors, nation-state actors, and actually the name of the game has been tightening security, not against the standard things that we see like ransomware, but actually against bespoke and much more complex and potentially much more damaging attacks that could take out critical national infrastructure. But interestingly, the government's also looking a bit to the future as well. Quantum computers, we keep hearing them about them in the news. And yeah, the reality is they're probably still 5 years away at least. And that timescale for most customers is not an issue. But actually for some people it is. The government are worried about what they call a record and replay attack, where you effectively record data that's traveling over an encrypted network now, play it back at your leisure in a few years' time, and then by the time quantum computers are available, you can decrypt that at your leisure, and it's fairly easy to do. And the problem is that classified data has got a shelf life of 15 years, and critical national infrastructure that's going in now might have a shelf life of 50 years. So actually, yeah, it is a problem that that's at that kind of level is starting to worry about. And putting a bit of context on that, most of the internet at the minute runs on RSA 2048 public key cryptography. It's kind of one of the de facto standards, and for good reason. And breaking that using a conventional computer is estimated as about 13.7 billion years. But to put this in context, if you had a quantum computer doing exactly that same piece of cryptography, it would be able to crack it in just 42 minutes. So that's how serious the threat is. And they are starting to worry about it now. But actually, the other thing is that that's, of course, quite specific to government and CNI. Actually, Ukraine is also, though, having an impact on other sectors. So retail, for example, are worried about recession. So the trends there, actually, we're seeing people really worried about the costs of cybersecurity and how they can reduce costs in cybersecurity. A SOC, a security operations center, is a really expensive thing to run. And so how do you actually reduce costs in cybersecurity without dramatically cutting back on the security that you're going to do? And of course, underpinning both of these, and actually probably true across virtually every sector, is an awful lot of people are still playing catch up from COVID. Lots of work was done in a hurry to get people remote working and to get people out of the offices. And actually, people are still out there in offices now, out of offices now. I'm working from home, and many other people will be, no doubt. The problem is that doing that work at speed means that there was potential for mistakes, and people are still shoring up and validating what's actually in their infrastructure. And actually, people are looking now as well to think actually all of the infrastructure that we put in for remote working, a lot of it's done using conventional VPNs. And actually, is that really fit for purpose? So we're seeing people start to look at things like zero trust networking as a solution. We know it's coming, and actually it also has the benefits of building in security by design, which is something we feel very passionately about. And if done well, it can eliminate whole classes of problems. If you just bear with me, I can give you a very quick example of this that we may have heard of, in fact. Travelex. Travelex is an interesting company. They actually had a fairly conventional networking infrastructure, and actually it was by and large pretty secure. The problem was that they didn't quite have as much control of it as they perhaps would have liked to have. And attackers used an exploit in one of their secure VPN endpoints and got a foothold inside the network, and from there launched a ransomware attack. And the impact for that company was absolutely horrific. Of course, a lot of people will be sitting there going, well, we know what's in our infrastructure, we know what's in our network, and we'd never do that, would we? But my question is that actually true? Especially after so many changes we pushed through so quickly. So the question is, how many vulnerabilities are sitting in people's infrastructure that they just don't know about? And my belief is that that's very much what we're seeing in 2023, is people really playing catch up and trying to understand how to get control of increasingly complicated networks and infrastructures and IT.
Great. Kobe, what are your thoughts on the major trends for next year?
Yeah, so I will continue with 4.1. One is to represent the kind of issue that we are solving in findings. We see continuous growth in supply chain threats. I think we are going to be another spike in 2023, and looking forward, we see a dramatic increase in attacks which are driven from IoT connectivity within organizations. The trend of IoT and OT in industrial environment, ICS environment that are connected will drive more and more threats towards those organizations. And the major trend around supply chain is visibility across the long tail, meaning to grow the vendor risk management program, the visibility of the supply chain towards covering the entire long tail of vendors. That could be a dramatic growth in requirements from an organization, from covering about 5 to 7% of the critical vendors under some regulation to the entire 80, 100% of the engaged parties, and being able to come up with an automated solution to do so. This is one trend to invest in supply chain security. The other ones are more on the, I would say, the macro level. One, I think we will see increasing or continuously increasing accountability across the security organization. CISOs are becoming more and more accountable for their operation, the visibility, the damage, the public relations that are coming from cybersecurity attacks are continuing to increase. We saw the example just a few days ago of former Uber CISO, and that will increase dramatically. That aligns with a spike that is going to grow in 2023 around regulatory compliance. New regulations are forming all over the world, definitely organizations that are multi-jurisdictional. The CISO, the GRC team will need to take into consideration good standing in terms of more regulations. So there would be a need to track different regulations by the CISO team. And last but not least, unfortunately, I think we will do that in a more challenging budget environment. The economic ecosystem is affecting the budgeting capabilities, and CISOs would need to be like more precise on their budgeting, the way they budget, they prioritize. And I think there are a few questions further down the road addressing that. So I'll leave that for later.
Reuven, please.
Yeah, so I totally agree with things that were mentioned before, but there is one thing that I think that I want to put, in the focus of this discussion, and that is that cybersecurity offensive operations are becoming more and more personal, right? So, of course, the things that we heard about supply chain, I couldn't agree more, by the way. I think that the gain that you get as an attacker by attacking a single organization, and from this organization getting access to multiple other organizations, think about service providers, right? And Ellen mentioned also that they are working with governments. We've seen multiple cases lately in which service providers were attacked, and from service providers, governments were, or government data was at risk in an immediate way. So definitely those are trends that are already being discussed. But from my point of view, the personal aspect of things, that's something that we need definitely to emphasize, as I don't see a lot of organizations taking the personal protection of their VIPs into consideration. And let me give you an example. We've just dealt with a situation in Europe in which the son of one of the biggest organizations in this specific country, the son of the CEO, was extorted based on sexual content that was available with his or connection to his own, let's say, digital presence in the network. And then this specific pressure was used in order to actually get access to the organization throughout the home network. Again, extending maybe what Ellen mentioned before, that the working from home thing was not really thought carefully before we moved and put the entire, let's say, security protection on the unprotected home network. And then you have your kids connected to the same environment, and then access to the VPN of the organization, or any kind of access that you have, remote access to your organization, can be then also be at risk based on this kind of access. So the personal aspect of things, being able, for example, to bypass multi-factor authentication, again, that's something that we've seen as one of the big successes of the industry lately. That's something that I can tell you already, multi-factor authentication is not good enough now, right? We can speak about what and how, but putting that as a single a line of defense, that's something that wouldn't work. And that's something that we see already. Again, because it becomes personal, because people are targeting people and not organization, that's something that will definitely be an increased risk, and we see that definitely in the near future. The last thing that I maybe want to mention is maybe a negative trend that we see coming from the security industry and not from the offensive part in this case, and that's putting everything that we have as a single line of defense or first line of defense in what we call detection and response capabilities. Detection and response capabilities are extremely important. That's something that is critical to an organization. That's something that must be there. However, you cannot rely on a single line of defense. And detection and response by definition, that's something that you detect, meaning something already happened, and then you respond to it. We need to go back to the basics and talk about prevention first, then detection, then response. That's how I see it, at least.
Great. Thank you, Reuven. Can we ask Jay to get out his crystal ball, please?
Hi. I think Reuven's right, and so are Alan and Kobe about everything they say. I woke up this morning and I had 4 phishing emails in my inbox, three of which were not very good, one of which was very compelling. So people are targeted, and you have to think about that as the number one issue. So in terms of 2023 trends, issues around business continuity, supply chains, and related issues pertain. Nothing has changed, I think. But there are some concerning trends, one of which is around government initiatives. So governments around the world are looking at mandating the creation of backdoors in software applications that would be available or made available to law enforcement and other government agencies to do their jobs. And I think, though very well intentioned on the part of elected officials, some of these proposals are fundamentally misguided, because to the extent that there is a backdoor in any piece of software, it's discoverable, not only available to good actors, but also available to bad actors. And I think as these proposals become law and regulations in more and more jurisdictions, there will be repercussions. Consequences could include the movement of companies out of certain jurisdictions. And that's already happened in India. India's new laws have actually gotten companies like Proton, a wonderful Swiss high security company, to move all of its servers out of the country. And other companies are moving their operations and data center operations out of India at the same time. If that happens in the UK, that will further hurt economic interests for sure. So there are a couple of dangers around these government initiatives. One is around unintended consequences that could hurt the economy and the tech industry. The other is around catastrophic consequences should a sophisticated bad actor decide to exploit some of these mandated backdoors. So I would suggest that everybody who cares about cybersecurity, especially at board or senior leadership level, take a hard look at what their elected officials are doing and make their voices heard. We're a member of something called the Global Encryption Coalition. It's a not-for-profit that advocates on behalf of end-to-end encryption. And that might be a good starting point for a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Alan Moffatt, your thoughts, please.
Thanks, Charles. And I think most of it has actually been covered by the rest of the panelists very succinctly as well. As part of it, I'd probably just add in the fact that when we start to look at ransomware, and we see that now that it's actually now no longer just being targeted individually, but you're actually seeing states being held at ransom. So if you look at the Costa Rica and the money that was taken out of Costa Rica and the fact that the National Health Service and various different things around that, you're starting to see a more collated approach, a larger approach. In addition to that, what we're also seeing is that foreign intelligence services are now working with organised crime units to actually pick up the stuff on the ground, and especially around when embargoes have been put onto countries when they're no longer being able to do commercial trade with them. So they have to then start to look at extorting things like cryptocurrencies and stealing cryptocurrencies and doing various different things, but then having the ability to disperse that money around and be able to put it in. And that's, even though that seemed as though it's probably a higher level than probably most of our delegates on today will work at, but it has a knock-on effect. I think it was Reuven that said that, about the whole point of the knock-on effect and consequential impacts that it has round about that. I think additionally coming across this, I think it was Alan that mentioned the COVID. With the aid of COVID, as we've seen when we had the double recession a number of years ago, a lot of organisations have got now start to look at their budgets, and they start putting it back into front-end operations to bring them back up, because that's where they get their money from. So it means that less budgets getting put back into the back office, such as cybersecurity and various other things. Probably the emerging thing, I think Alan quite succinctly talked about there around the fact of quantum computing and everything around about it. Absolutely, and I agree with it. It's going to be in the future. I think other things I'm starting to see out there is the artificial intelligence, especially around deepfake. And even though deepfake is not necessarily on the attack on the cyber community, but the ability to create images, the ability to create video just from short bits of video and make people say whatever you want them to say. And I've actually seen touches of that during the Russia-Ukraine engagement as well. I think also with the foreign intelligence service levels, with the Russia and the Ukraine aspect of it, what we're seeing is North Korea are firing missiles over Japan, as you know, at the moment to it. The same way they've got to test things and show their strength. That also happens in the cyber warfare as well. So they'll be stretching their arms and pushing their arms out a wee bit to show what they can do and test what the water is like. So again, there can be impacts on that. Probably the last thing I want to mention, because everything else has been touched on, the standard stuff there, email phishing, software vulnerabilities, it's all there and it will still remain there. We're seeing it all the time. But one of the incidental threats is around about this is actually the lack of ability to be able to employ cybersecurity staff at the moment. It's really difficult. We've got a lack of good cyber trained staff, especially in the UK and other areas of the world, etc. And that's going to become more problematic over a period of time. And that's something that needs to be addressed at grassroots levels to be able to bring people in so that over the next 4 or 5 years, we start to develop the competencies and the knowledges to be able to help organisations. Slightly different because I think most of the rest of it was actually covered very well by the rest of the panel. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Alan. Well, I find that fascinating. I was personally furiously taking notes. The next question is relating to having articulated where we think these threats and trends are going, and we heard a range there from supply chain attacks, the geopolitical situation, highly targeted malware, including also just learned from Alan, using quantum computing to generate targeted malware using deepfake videos. That's pretty scary. And obviously then on top of it, more practical things like limited budgets and the scarcity of staff. The next question to the panel is, in order to meet all these threats, how should a CISO, how should a security organization look to build the right security budgets, and what data sources should they use to build that budget and convince the board and their management to spend that money? And I think based on what I've heard so far, we'll get Kobe to kick that question off, please.
Yeah, good question, Charles. Thank you. So I personally am a believer of the CISO, or the security organization, serving the business. And I think it's becoming more and more important that security will be positioned as a business enabler, and that requires the CISO to start the budgeting process from understanding the business, really understanding the business, doing an impact assessment that will take into consideration the lines of businesses, the critical factors in the organization, being able to communicate and to understand from the organization what would be the priorities in order to translate everything into an action plan that would make sense business-wise. And I think that would be a starting point from my experience. I see that CISOs who are aligned with business end up with more budgets, and they can justify investments better rather than requiring budget that the board itself doesn't understand. The second element in that, and I guess Jay will agree with me, is to invest in visibility to the board or the management. I think that being able to communicate in a way which is quantitative, in a way that that business people in the organization can relate to, what is the risk, what is the impact, what is the meaning of the investment and the return on investment, or the other metrics that the CISO should be measured, will end up with better discussion, more fruitful discussion towards budgeting. We see that as one of the drivers towards effective conversation and better budgeting. And my last tip would be not to get tempted by trends. I think within the cybersecurity industry, we have I would say the opportunity every now and then to pitch some kind of a trend which no one can understand what we're talking about. I think that eventually that is a mistake. A lot of the time, those are only trends that decline, waste a lot of investment, a lot of dollars, and don't be tempted to that. Basically, the investments should be aligned with what the business needs rather than what is like trend on every point in time. So that would be my my recommendations for next year.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that, to the sort of budget question?
I probably would add into that, having worked as a CISO for various companies as part of services and everything else to it, I totally agree with everything that you're saying, Kobe, absolutely, and engagement with the leadership. I think the difference you see, it depends on the security posture and the maturity of the organization you go into. So if we go into an immature cybersecurity based or information security based organization, then what we usually do is recommend is it becomes a central facility. And it actually looks at that, exactly as Kobe's saying, doing the gap analysis around where they need to be as a business, where they want to be as a business, and what's the pragmatic approach to be there. But then controlling the budgets, controlling the projects, the program from the center until they get a level of maturity. When you go into more mature organizations, then once it's done right, then the information security requirements, the risks, the actions, all of that are actually then devolved into the responsible areas, whether it be HR for personnel issues, whether it be facilities for physical, whether it be IT for the technology side. And then obviously you're looking at the compliance round about it. So is that, if you do, I believe if the CISO does their job right, the budget gets less and less, and it gets devolved accordingly across the organization, can just start to change the culture and across it.
Yeah, maybe to add on that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I couldn't agree more with both of the previous speakers. I mean, so Kobe was saying that actually trying to make sure that the budget is totally aligned with what the business wants actually is absolutely critical. And there's so many organizations who I've seen who basically are just buying more tech and sticking more tech in, and it becomes almost an empire building and completely pointless. I think there's actually a need for a lot of organizations to really take a huge step back from where they've landed at the moment and actually look at fundamentally, instead of trying to patch up their IT infrastructure with more and more cybersecurity products and more solutions and technology on top of it, take a really big step back, do a risk assessment, work out basically where your risks actually are, understand where you actually need to improve, and potentially re-architect what you're doing from the ground up. I think our IT and systems have got so complex recently that I think actually it's time for a rethink in a lot of organizations.
Yeah. That's very important, what you just mentioned, Alan, like complexity. That's the #1 issue that we see in organizations at the moment, right? When you see complexity, you see vulnerabilities. That goes together. One thing that I would just add on that, just to maybe make sure that we are aligned there, is that CISOs must be able to speak in a way that is extremely clear without any kind of vague, let's say, explanation or vague description of the situation. I think we need to avoid the fear factor that controlled the cybersecurity industry for so long, right? What if something is going to happen? And we need to be able first to speak in the board level language, which again, I'm sure that Jay is struggling in order to do that exactly with the organization. But speaking the language, that's important. Let's make sure that we give clear way of understanding to board members what is the risk, as you just mentioned, what we need in order to reduce the risk, and how those actions are actually going to support the business in the end. We need to leave and put them behind all the concepts of tick the box exercises that we have. Let's do one this, and one of this. It doesn't work, right? It has to be correlated to the business risk in a very clear way, and communication must be crystal clear. That's at least my take on it.
Great, thank you. So typically we're meant to leave the audience Q&A to the end, but we just had a question come in that I think is relevant to this topic. So I'm going to read it out. Question says, how do I provide assurance to my board that I've allocated and utilized my resources in the best fashion and demonstrated I've taken due care?
Yeah. Do you want me to take the first shot?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. So from my point of view, one of the things that we are trying to do inside is exactly that, right? So when you quantify the organizational risk, then you put on the other side the cost and effort that you have on a specific cybersecurity project, and then the residual contribution to the cybersecurity maturity increase and risk reduction, you have a very clear decision-making process. If you understand that, for example, a project X is going to cost you 200K, it's going to reduce approximately 20 million of your risk. And in the end, you're going to deliver that in a time frame that is like something in the ranges of 3 months, just as an example, of course. Then you have a clear decision criteria. Either it works for your organization or not, right? That's something that has to be very clear. But the numbers that I've talked about, in order to create a framework that can be quantifiable, as Kobe mentioned before, quantity is very important. And also the quality can be evaluated in a clear way, numeric way, based on a scientific approach. That's something that I would recommend every organization to utilize. Now, how do you build that specifically? That's something for that you need to have first visibility into the organizational overall risk. Second, you need to understand the quantifiable parameters, including, for example, what will be the cost in case of breach in your organization. And more than that, of course, what will be the residual contribution of each and every one of your mitigation factors to reduce the risk and to be able, of course, to support the business with the cybersecurity needs.
Great.
If I may add to what Reuven just said and continue on that, I think that we see an evolving trend around crisis management. there is a need to reflect the cost of crisis. We always love to say that it's not a matter of whether you will get hacked, it's a matter of when you will get hacked. And it's true. I think what a lot of business people in the organizations are missing is the understanding of what is the quantified amount or damage, and there is enough statistics to try and estimate that, and that should be compared with the investment. So the CEO or the CFO, whoever make the decisions, will basically see that a certain shining malware detector might cost X, but the damage multiplied by the probability to get hacked is Y, and that results in a sort of a business plan and a return of investment that financial guys can understand. And I think that should be also a methodology for each kind of security investment. If you cannot justify the investment, you have an issue there.
Charles, I would probably follow on exactly what Kobe was saying. And when approaching the organization, and both Reuven and Kobe have said it, speak in business terms. Don't speak about losses, speak about the business benefits that it brings to it and the aspects to it. Understand the business processes that it's supporting, understand the activities that require to support that, and why this enabling technology will be able to support those. And it's actually about this spend actually will keep this system available, 99.99%, which is actually a revenue generator or a service supporter for us throughout that period of time. So it's putting it into business speak and really not talking about technologies and not talking about those different areas, about what is the benefit to the business and towards the business objectives that will be fine.
Great, thank you. I'm going to swiftly move on to the next question, which is kind of related. So if the previous question was, how do the security professionals convince management to spend money and convince them that it's asking for the correct amount of resource? The next question that we wrote down said, what should company management and boards be asking about security? And we've had a follow-on question from the audience, which is very aligned to this, saying, what should the company management be asking about its future security, as well as, are we adequately protected today? And I think we'll start with Reuven on that one.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with what are maybe not the correct questions, right? So asking the question that is maybe the most repeatable question that we hear in boardrooms is, are we 100% protected, right? Or do we invest enough? Or do we overspend on cybersecurity? I think those are questions, let's say, maybe in the direction of where we need to go with that, but those are not the right questions. From my point of view, the questions on the boardroom should be first around, let me understand as a board member, let me understand where is the risk. And then let me understand what is the size of the risk, right? Because boards, not only CISOs, by the way, it was mentioned before that CISOs are getting more accountable. Boards are accountable as well for cybersecurity. And now the shared responsibility and accountability, that's something that is extremely important. But if I'm taking accountability for something, I need to understand first, what is the risk? Second, what is the impact in case of something happens? Third, what will be the likelihood for that to happen? All those together provide me with a very clear understanding of the situation. Based on that, it's very easy to decide what needs to be invested in the organization, right? Each organization has their own criteria on how to do that, whether it's 1% of the risk, 5% of the risk, or 20% of the risk. That's something that you can decide as an organization. But without the parameters to decide, you're just shooting blank, right? You're trying to aim for something and you're not able to know whether you actually did something right. So from my point of view, without visibility to the parameters that I mentioned before, you won't be able to judge whether you're doing good work. And actually the CISO cannot justify really what happens. And again, that goes back to the fear factor that I mentioned before, which until, let's say, lately was the leading way of different cybersecurity teams to actually get the budget. So from my point of view, being able to ask those questions in the board. First, where is the risk? Second, what is the likelihood for that to happen? Third, what will be the impact in case of a cybersecurity incident. If you're asking those questions, the rest will follow, and you are able to actually plan the budget and justify the budget later. So those are the questions that I would ask if I was in the board of a specific company.
I pick up on that and just add an extra question that I'd be asking as well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a great believer in digital security by design, building stuff in at the root level. So I'd actually be asking, if you got the CSO and the CIO often together, basically said, if you were starting from a completely blank sheet of paper, how would you create a new IT infrastructure that meets the needs of the business and is completely secure? And okay, great. So once you've done that exercise, which actually isn't necessarily that hard to do, now what are you going to do in order to direct the spend over the next few years to slowly move in that direction? And that can, that kind of slightly longer term thinking can avoid the sticking plaster problem that we end up with basically it's a suboptimal solution with sticking plaster after sticking plaster and leaky joint after leaky joint in it. So I'm a believer, go back to bare metal and fathom out what you would be creating from scratch. And that's the board should be asking the IT team as a whole to work together on that and not just expecting the CISO to come up with the problems for a leaky sieve.
I'd like to add to that. I think Alan and Reuven really hit the nail on the head with their two answers to closely related questions. I think non-IT experts on boards tend to outsource the problem. They say, well, I'll give it to an IT department, I'll give it to consultants, we'll go to vulnerability tests done every once in a while. And that is absolutely the wrong approach. I think cybersecurity issues are a flavor of risk, and your risk committees should be looking at cybersecurity issues on an ongoing basis and engaging with your own IT and security staff and whoever in the outside world you need to engage with on an ongoing basis. And I think something Reuven said is really important, and Alan, what you said fed into that so beautifully, and that is it's not binary. You're never going to get 100% protection, and you're never going to be done. You're not going to wake up one morning and say, okay, we're covered now, we're good, let me go on to something else. Not going to happen. You kind of pick what level of risk you're willing to live with and what kind of budget you're willing to spend to get to that level of risk. But even after you've done your very, very best job and you've engaged with everyone and you've inculcated standards and training in your organization and you've reached out to your partners and suppliers, you've done everything you should, you're still sitting on risk. And I don't want to be a shill for insurance companies, but I think one of your first phone calls should be to your insurance agents. And you can say, what kind of protection can we get and what's it going to cost us? And I think that's a very important part of the discussion.
Charles, I would probably add into that, because that's been an excellent discussion so far, is that it depends on also the size of your organization. The bigger the organization, the more devolved they are away, the more they get further away from it. Small organizations, the IT manager might also be the CISO that sits on what they call the board or whatever else to it. And I think that depends. But ultimately, the question that I would always ask on a board, as a non-security specialist, if that was the role it was on, rather than the role I actually do, is what we actually do as a business, is it, will it continue in the event of something happening? And that is around business continuity planning, for one thing. And what I mean by that is not just saying have we tested if a building goes or whatever else. Have we got the right scenarios in place that test in relation to what we believe are the highest threats and risks to our organization? And if I know they've been tested and tested effectively, I've got a certain level of confidence, not a full, but I've got a certain level. Additionally, I'm asking the questions around what are we meant to be? Have we got any regulatory requirements? Have we got any compliance? Where are we with this? Are we up to date with those sides? How are we validating that? Are we validating it ourselves, i.e. checking our own work, or are we getting third parties in to validate that? So to allow me to get some sleep if I'm sitting on a board, I'm wanting that level of confidence around it. And then the next thing is absolutely right, is that review of, have I got the right experience and knowledge within the staff and the information, and with our third parties to drive us forward to it. And the last thing I would probably be looking at is, just from my own background, is where it is business critical. And I love the bit that Reuven put in there about the fact when you're doing the risk assessment, it's about business impact. It's about what impact does it have to if you breach confidentiality, lose integrity, lose availability, what impact does that have to the business, to your clients, to your members of staff, and then taking the appropriate commensurate actions in line with that.
So, Alan, you just to move the panel on a tiny bit and to bring in the next question, you raised a really interesting thing right at the end there about almost like measuring risk, right? You're saying, have we measured the risk to sort of demonstrate the impact of the cyber program? And then this leads us to the next question, which is, how does one measure risk? And then how do you make sure the security plan you're building mitigates that risk and make sure that does align to the business needs? And I wonder, Kobe, if you could dive in there, please.
Yeah, so before I'll dive in, I want to mention, to highlight a point about the strategic discussion between the organization and the CISO. And I think that should be aligned with the strategic trend in the industry, the cybersecurity industry. And generally speaking, I think the CISO can communicate the needs basically in few silos. Silo number one is, what are my crown jewels? What is the organizational crown jewels, the lines of businesses that we need to defend? What do I need to defend? And that will translate into direct investments in tools and technologies and projects and processes and so on. The other trend is around risk, I would say delegation. We want to outsource risk. Jay mentioned cyber insurance, for example. This is a subset of this industry. What is the kind of risk that I don't want to defend by myself? I want others to defend and or to delegate the risk, and that could be insurance, that could be managed service providers that will outsource that. There are trends around managed MDRs and managed SOC and managed intelligence and so on. And the other major trend is around risk management. What do I choose to take risk? And I need to manage it, and I need to take measures in order to contain and manage and lower the risk over time. In that regard, I think there are a few best practices. The starting point that I would recommend will always be to start from the business. Inherent risk, impact assessment, to have a list of all my the organizational projects, lines of businesses, subsidiaries, etc. Align that with the cybersecurity risk, the data risk, what is the regulatory exposure, and so on, and to put metrics on top of that to understand what might be the probability to for exposure or the risk to be fulfilled, and that should be aligned with metrics around financial impact, like to quantify the risk, as Reuven said before. For that, once you have this, and that could be prioritized, that could be discussed with the board, how to better prioritize, and best of that, basically to align that with an action plan, the risk reduction plan, mitigation plan, what should be outsourced, what should be directly invest in reducing the risk and mitigate that, and then to manage that over time. That requires internal resources on the CISO organization to track it. From our experience, that might mean thousands of items that should be tracked over time in order to continuously communicate the aggregated risk level and how do we mitigate that over time. Being able to deploy that over time basically creates this strategic discussion much more effective and better budgeting afterwards.
Could I add a little bit here, Charles? Everything Kobe said, Reuven said, and Alan said is spot on and unbelievably important. I would add a little bit more for the board, and that is, when you've done all of that good practice, best practice work, practice it. If your IT people are telling you, we have great backup plans, we'll be back up and running in 20 minutes or 2 days or whatever it is, I would actually go and challenge them. I'd say, tell you what, at some point this weekend, you're going to get a phone call, and that phone call is going to say, bam, we're now down, you do the backup plan, we want to see how long it takes you and how well it works. So ongoing practice of these what-if scenarios is worth more than anything you can say, because on the battlefield, if you will, you'll see what actually does work and what was a good plan, but may not have survived the first contact. So it's very important that the board be on top of that and that they work with their consultants or IT or security people, not in a gotcha kind of way, but in a learning kind of way, and say, well, let's try this. Let's see how good we are. Let's see if we can survive a ransomware attack. Let's see if we can survive 2 data centers going down in an earthquake or whatever it is, and make sure that you have some real world intelligence backing up those theoretical risk assessments.
Charles, I just said that, Jay, absolutely fantastic. You're absolutely spot on. And that's where the evidence comes in to give the confidence back to the board. And it can start so simply. Is there, of whether it's actually having discussions around a tabletop discussion leading up to the actual implementation of what we call remount exercises. And my counterparts will be aware of those, where you're actually implementing the full impact. And that's, again, one of these fantastic things of being able to say as a board, shown interest to the organisation, but actually asking them to prove what they're doing. And if they want the money to continue on doing, it then gives that confidence level. I think one of the other things I would probably add into the bit that Reuven was mentioning earlier on about the risks, and we all know the risk, the threat, plus the vulnerabilities, plus the business impact. But this is where your threat intelligence comes in and your threat assessment to understand those threats and whether they're relevant to you and have they been sanitized, or probably are they coming from a true source. And because that's the start of where you're going to look at. It could be a simple, yes, maybe foreign intelligence service doesn't really impact your organisation, but the organised crime may, because of the type of the data you're doing to it. And again, it's looking at what those impacts are going to be. And it just goes right back to both what Reuven and Jay was saying about the impact and making sure that the business aware, do not give them in technology speak or anything else, give them everything in business speak, and the business impact around the financial impact or the brand impact or various other things is crucial to them, because that's what they'll understand.
Yeah, maybe one last element to this question, if I may, Charles, just quickly. In risk management in general, and I think that's just to complete everything that was said here, which is really extremely beneficial and important, is that risk management is a dynamic exercise, right? That's something that you should do not only once a year, as we see in a lot of organizations, or once every time period. You need to be agile enough in order to react to changes in the industry, changes in the organization, and of course, everything that happens that you might need as an organization to re-evaluate your risk posture in general. So being dynamic and agile would be a crucial part of any kind of risk management program that you have in your organization. Something to keep in mind. Also, board encouragement for that. That means every board meeting, when you ask the questions about risk, that encourages the organization to actually continuously deal with it. And that's something that must be integrated, from my point of view, in every organization.
Thank you. So for the next question, we've also heard a lot about what people should be doing. The next question is more in the spirit of learning from our mistakes. So question to the panel, what are the most common security mistakes organizations tend to make? And I'll kick off with Alan Platt, please.
So I've seen quite a number of organizations who are still too reliant, in my opinion, on kind of old school cybersecurity practices and defenses. And a lot of old school defenses are focused really on keeping intruders out of the networks. And they also assume that security is tight absolutely everywhere. So every PC is patched, it's running the right endpoint protection, et cetera, et cetera. Trouble is, it's simply not true anymore. When you start thinking about the fact that there's lots of bring your own device policies in there, lots of remote working, you know, people playing Minecraft at home as your kids playing Minecraft on your work's PC, it's pretty difficult to be in control of everything. And even with automated patching and update services like Intune, the chance of knowing what devices are connected to your network is and what servers are critical at every point is vanishingly small. And actually, even some critical ones can get forgotten about, you know, similar to the kind of Travelex hack. So my opinion, it's basically the assumption that that your defenses are going to be good enough to keep intruders out. It's just not going to happen. The trick is basically trying to turn that around on its head. And yeah, building security, you know, things like zero trust networking, network access is a really good approach to mitigate that kind of problem that you see, where you don't need to hack somebody's server. You just need to hack a light bulb that's connected to the network in order to get into the network access. It's the world's changed, so we can't rely on old technologies, and we need to pick up attacks when they happen, pick up people when they get in, and rely on things like zero trust networking technologies to stop them getting into sensitive stuff, even if they get into the network.
Anyone else want to follow up on mistakes? I'm very keen to hear this. Maybe Jay, do you have any classic mistakes?
Board members, especially non-technical board members, often do a file and forget strategy around security. They hand it off and say, we'll come back to this at our next budget meeting or our next annual risk committee meeting. So not entirely different to what Alan just said. I think he got it. That's what you need to do. But I might add, just assume that even as a non-expert, you have a contribution to make. Assume that you can ask simple, open-ended questions. You can ask about results, and that will give you a platform to talk sensibly with the people who are experts, either in your organization or the consultants and supplier companies you work with. So don't discount your own ability. Get in there and keep engaged, because everyone at board level or senior management level has a stake in this, a stake in the outcome, and you should not defer. You should absolutely not defer.
Can I just pick up on a word that you used there as well, non-experts? And actually, we recognise that most people who are using the kit that we're setting up and the IT services that we're providing are actually not IT experts. And I think maybe that's another mistake as well that people sometimes make, is that they put in place so many security features and capabilities, and multi-factor authentication is the least of these problems. But sometimes people make the mistake of putting in place security capability without really checking them for usability. And actually, users are astonishingly good at working around security problems as and when they find them, or finding another way of doing something. So I think actually forgetting that the people who are using this, the stuff that we're setting up, they've got to find it usable, they've got to find it realistic, and security has to be done with usability in mind as well.
Charles, I'll probably add on to that. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Corey.
No, just wanted to add to what was said. Basically, my advice would be not to make threats. I think the era in which the CISO could threaten the board or the management with some Armageddon scenarios is over. Basically, they're becoming more educated. They understand that there is a risk. They understand that there is a need to invest, but it should be a dialogue and communication. In that regard, I think the era in which you can threaten, it doesn't make it to CISOs. It needs to be based on business aspects. And the second one I wanted to add is continuing on Alan. Basically, the world is moving on, and CISOs needs to understand that they need to align with the trend. I'm really astonished sometimes when I'm meeting organizations that still pitch to me that on-prem is more secure than the cloud. I think it's for a long time now history. The economics of the cloud just cannot be beaten by on-prem, and it's much more secured actually. And also acts a cost saving role for the organization. So I would advise to whoever is still relying on on-prem strategies to reconsider that.
Kobe, I'd like to add something really quickly, if I could. Recently, I had a talk with a Singapore government official, and Singapore requires IT companies serving government-linked corporations and other large enterprises in Singapore to have in-country data centers. Brazil has similar legislation, so do some other countries, and it's a farce. I agree with you completely. Where the server is sitting has absolutely nothing to do with the security of the data center or the server.
So if I may use this honorable stage to make an announcement, we are next week actually launching a solution with the Singapore government in Singapore, and it will be hosted in Singapore, but it will be in the cloud. A few years ago in my previous company, we were forced to do an on-prem solution in Singapore. So the world is moving in that regard. I think it's more
glad to hear it.
Yeah, I think it's more of the perception around compliance and accountability. In my point of view, I think that there is a notion of if the data is hosted and backed in a jurisdiction, then we can hold accountable the organizations who are using the solution. The world will evolve in that regard, but I'm happy to say that in that regard, there are countries that we meet that are aligning with the trend. It is a tremendous cost saving to the companies themselves. The solutions are much more cost effective while providing better security.
Charles, I would probably, looking at the most common mistakes I see, I'd probably within the board are not technology, they're people driven. From the board, the most obvious things we see is the assumptions around things are being done, assumptions that our third-party suppliers know what they're doing and are secure, and that goes back to what the rest of the panel were talking earlier on. Also, I think it comes down to management style, whereas companies that have got built-in silos, the way that they work, it means that there's a power culture built in. So when you try and change the culture, the security culture in the organization, there's this power culture that's constantly put across. Or when we talked about who's got the budget for this to put in security, I'm not paying for it. And that has to come from the very, very top. It then comes right down to management styles. And especially when we talk about insider threat, and probably everybody in the organization's seen it, where you've got people who have got high energy, high motivation. They're the players in the organization. They'll drive your organization forward. We've got people who have got high motivation but lower energy, and they'll follow the players, but they want to be part of your organization. You've got people who have got low motivation and low energy, and what we call the walking dead for a better term. Every organization's got them. Not as much as a threat to the organization, other than the fact that they might not do things. But we've also got the people who've got high energy and low motivation, and they're what we call the terrorists. Those are the individuals, if they're not managed, the more likely they were in the player scenario, but they've either been disciplined, not got the job they've went for, got a new manager that doesn't appreciate what they're doing, and everything else, and suddenly they've turned into that element to it. So again, the security around the organizations is, are we actually managing those situations and managing those people? So from my point of view, I see it from a management point of view at board level, and covering on to that as well as the technology thing.
Thanks. So just
Charles, maybe just one last thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we missed one thing that is extremely important. It's not on the board level or management level, but something that we hear quite a lot, right? The number one mistake that I see on a technical team might be, let's go next generation, right? We heard about a lot of next generation capabilities. You can go next generation once you have the basic foundations, right? So you cannot go to the next generation if you don't have the basics in place. So my advice here is don't skip the basics, right? You cannot say I have the best EDR in the world. That's why I'm now going to skip password management and password hygiene and endpoint hygiene and basic things that you expect to see. And you use a welcome 123 as password because you expect that your EDR will find something if someone will do something on your endpoint, right? That's not the right approach. Always go back to the basics. Password management, identity management, patch management. Again, basics, right? Those are important. Then once you have those in place, of course, going next generation is always important, but don't try to skip generations. And that's at least my take.
Great, thank you. And that leads nicely on to my final question. So the question that we've got written down here is, over the last 5 years, how do the panel see the role of the Chief Information Security Officer? How do we see it's changed? And we heard there from Kobe that maybe 5 years ago, the CISOs and the cybersecurity team and companies could make threats if you don't invest in our budget, then all these bad things will happen. And yet we just heard Reuven saying that, we need to stick to those basics. You can't just, you got to go back to the sort of fundamentals of, don't have your password as welcome 01. I don't know how you knew my password there, Reuven, but anyway, I'll change it later. So maybe we can start with Reuven actually on how the role of the CISO has changed over the last 5 years.
Yeah, so from my point of view, we mentioned before that accountability has shifted, right? 5 years ago, when something happens in the organization, a crisis, an incident, the first one to be blamed was the CISO. He was fired and everyone is happy, right? Since then, the accountability and the concept of cybersecurity management in the organization has changed. We see in a lot of board meetings now a cybersecurity responsible in the board meeting, not the CISO, but someone that the CISO needs to report to. That means that the CISO became a function that is responsible for the improvement of cybersecurity maturity in the organization, but is not the sole accountable person in the organization. So now he needs to work and facilitate also the data to decision makers and be able to communicate very clearly very complex technical problems to higher management and translate backwards to his technical team what management is looking for when it comes to business related requirements from cybersecurity. So he's kind of facilitator, if you may, to actually be the middleman between the technical teams and management, but is not carrying the overall accountability anymore, right? And that's extremely important from my point of view, because management involvement in cybersecurity is crucial to make sure that this is a successful journey in an organization. So the CISO, from my point of view, is an extremely critical role in the organization. And it's very important that there are other people, including the CEO and the board members, that are taking shared accountability if something happens.
Brilliant. Alan, I bet you've got something to say on this topic.
Yeah, I'm just following on to that. I totally agree with what Reuven saying. The only thing I would probably disagree with is I don't think the role of CISO has changed, the actual role of CISO. I think the responsibilities that, as you mentioned, to it and everybody else has changed. The CISO is still responsible for ensuring the right culture of the organization. It's not just about technology, it's about the people, it's about the physical, it's about the policies, the procedures, the compliance, the culture. However, I agree with Reuven is the fact that it's now been recognised more at executive level. And we're actually seeing as cybersecurity comes into things like governance and social and environmental ESG type stuff to it, mainly around data privacy, to be honest with you, but they're starting to be recognised in there. And is that split? Is that the CIO's work or is that the CISO's work? So I see the CISO being that person and get across. And then part of where I would say there's a slight difference, they need to be aware of what the business strategy is, what the IT strategy is, what's the HR strategy to it, and be able to pull all that together and be that awareness. And if the CISO is writing policies, or if the CISO is designing technologies, they're not a CISO, they're an information security manager of some sort, or an IT security manager. A CISO needs to stand above that at board level and be able to coordinate and confirm and give confidence to the board that everything is moving in the right direction and we are moving in the right security maturity model.
Great, and that nicely leads us actually into the first of the questions on the Slido panel. And by the way, just to the many people who've dialed in today, the Slido is very much open. We've got tons of questions and we'll try and get to the highest voted questions. So if people could sort of vote and prioritize the remaining 15 or so minutes we have together, that'd be very useful, at least for me. The first question here with 2 votes is, how do I improve the security culture across my organization? And I wonder, Alan, just following on from what you were saying, you were saying that we need to improve it. This question is, how?
Absolutely, Charles, and it's a great question. I think one of the things that's keen about it is security, like health and safety over the years, if we don't take a normative approach, if we don't take this hearts and minds approach and be able to show that the individual, everyone in the organization is responsible for security, it doesn't work. It won't be there, the maturity of the organization won't change. So if you look at the fact that culture is about the beliefs and the values of the organization, in between the culture, you've got the climate, which is the feelings and the behaviors and the values of individuals, right down to effective behavior, which is going to be on the performance side. And to allow it to do that, the organization's got to understand what kind of culture do they want, right back to the very first thing. And I don't know if it was Alan or Kobe, and apologies for that, that mentioned that everything has got to be related to the business objectives, the business needs. So your culture, whether it be a security culture, has got to be in line with that. So you've got as leadership, you've got to understand, what do you want? Do you want to be an autocratic democrat? Do you want to be able to devolve that responsibility out? You know, are you a task-oriented, process-oriented organization? So what's the culture that's right around security that will affect you? Then once you do that, you look to then start to apply that. And not just through training and awareness, but it's making sure you've got the right management systems in place. You've got the right pressure, the fair pressure. So when people are bypassing security because somebody is actually task-oriented, they just want to get the job done rather than actually going through a process, that you actually deal with that fairly. But you also recognise good practice. And this goes back to the whole point when we talked about devolved budgets. If a part of your organisation is doing well in security, give them more money, give them more responsibility, more accountability to actually recognise that in the organisation too. But the biggest thing comes from the management commitment. The management commitment, whether you decide a very simple thing is that everybody's going to have to wear ID badges in the work, but if the CEO walks about without the ID badge, it defeats the purpose to a certain degree. So it's again having that standardisation across those and across various different aspects.
So Alan also picked up there on a couple of words earlier on in that bit of discussion there. Actually, you mentioned health and safety, and I think that's actually an interesting example we can use, because driving health and safety cultures in organizations has been something that's been, was a huge problem for decades, but actually we're pretty much on top of it as a society now. Actually, health and safety practice can be really good. And part of that has been about, first of all, you can't just do a big bang training course, roll it out and then walk away, because we know that that doesn't work. You need to basically keep it in hearts and minds and keep it there. But also the thing that really made the material difference to health and safety behaviors is not just focusing on the accidents that were happening, but focusing on the near misses and the things that could have become accidents and the opportunities and the observations. And actually, I think actually being much more open about those kind of incidents, which will happen in most organizations, being much more open about them and actually helping people to understand what could have happened if it had been exploited. I think those near misses could be a real focus, and actually really being open about where you're not so good on cybersecurity, as well as helping people to become better.
If I may add to that, deploying cybersecurity awareness across organizations is a classical cultural change management process. There are quite a lot of solutions out there that replace, or the next generation, as Reuven said earlier, next generation of cyber awareness that basically address the challenge as an organizational challenge, as a change management, and basically is helping CISOs to shift the entire culture towards being more aware and more responsible for your own working environment. And 90% of the risk for spear phishing attacks, other exploits are coming from the human factor in the organization. So it's crucial to deploy a better culture in that regard. And I think there are quite a lot of experience in that as well.
I think just following on to that, Charles, because I think Kobe absolutely spot on. And I think when you start to look at a number of standards, so if you look at the technical standards, Cyber Essentials, PCI DSS, even the CIS Top 20, none of them will change the culture of your organization. They are technical controls. When you start to look at other standards like ISO 27001, there's the various things around about that. If they're applied correctly and appropriately, they change the culture, because they talk about leadership, they talk about HR, they talk about physical aspect. It takes the ownership back to the individual. Going back exactly as Alan was saying about the health and safety side there, they have to remediate, you have to record your near misses as well as your incidents, and you have to show remediation towards that, and that's what changes the culture. So absolutely, it's a people issue that's going to drive this forward.
Great, thanks all. So there's three questions which have got an equal number of votes, so I'll start at the top. Many of us are both suppliers to major institutions and also are recipients of third-party services. What are the panel's thoughts on optimizing supply chain security? And I think I'm going to start with Kobe on that one.
Yeah, the natural candidate, right? I would address with the way we decided to mitigate that. But basically, we are addressing the challenge in the same way that you just described. Every entity has a downstream side and an upstream side. And your security posture is a combination of both. The ability to assess, measure, monitor your downstream side, your vendors, your suppliers, your partners, as well as being able to reflect your security posture and your aggregated posture from your supply chain towards other customers and stakeholders. So this is the way we address that. It's also coming from like cost efficiency point of view, that you don't need to address or to engage with few vendors in order to manage your security posture. You need to do it in one place. And I think this is the right approach, to basically look on yourself as an organization, as yourself and your decentralized parties, whether those are customers and your vendors and partners, and manage the entire ecosystem in one place.
I'm just going to follow up that with a follow-up question of my own, because obviously, working at London Stock Exchange Group, we have many suppliers. We are also a critical part of, all of our customers and client supply chain. How does the panel see that sort of companies can help, the people who rely on them in their supply chain, kind of help them assess us?
So if I would just add, the reason we partnered with London Stock Exchange to start with is the same approach, enabling London Stock Exchange, the ecosystem, to be better secured, the understanding that there are too many endpoints, too many stakeholders to manage, and the need to provide a solution. Not only in cybersecurity, there is also ESG domain and trade compliance domain and other aspects of risk that are relevant in the same place. And we are basically helping the ecosystem through our tool, which is available on the marketplace, to mitigate that risk.
I would probably add into that, Charles, because that has been longly awaited, can I say, Kobe, having the organizations that are highly regulated, where they are getting third-party questionnaires coming in and out there, and they're almost dedicated time actually just filling in third-party questionnaires. The other thing round about that is when you're actually offered a service that's going to high-end companies, again, they also want to verify that you're doing it, and that is the biggest thing. One of the things that we also see is a lot of time wasted. So they'll come in and they'll ask certain questions, are you ISO 27001 certified? Yes. And that's all they ask. They don't ask about scope. They don't ask about statement of applicability. But also, if you put the riders in, we work with a lot of organizations to help them develop their own responses so that they can actually send a response out, send it back to the third-party company and say, if that is sufficient for you, fantastic. If it's insufficient, then come back and ask us more questions. You can't get away with that with all the different aspects, as Kobe, you'll know, hence why the solution's there, but it's a starter for 10. And quite often, I've seen people putting in, if you're also reviewing the third-party security assessments, please do follow up on them, because people will put riders in, and it's only when there's a breach of contract will it actually come out and say, actually, they've put a rider in there that countermands what's in one of your clauses in your contract. So it is a crucial part in what you've got to be able to do.
Maybe to add on that, and I think that what you guys just mentioned is really important. But one thing that I would add to that, supply chain or third-party security starts with the initial maybe contracting phase or even engagement phase, right? So security by design falls here as well, as Alan mentioned before. If you plan accordingly, if you know exactly what this supplier needs and only provide specifically the access that is required, you can actually reduce quite a lot of the attack surface that is exposed to your third party. So, of course, it's important to do the post-engagement phases. To Alan's point, also to do that continuously and not only one time. This is extremely important. Being able to do that not only, by the way, in a passive way, which we see, the bit sites of the world and so on. That's, of course, nice way to start, but that's not good enough. It's not comprehensive enough to understand the risk. That's something we need to be much deeper into the customer understanding. And on the other hand, of course, to respect the privacy of the vendor itself. So you need to balance that in a way. And I'm sure that Kobe and the team, they are doing that in this way. But to me, the engagement part, making sure that only the need to have basis concept is being implemented, that will be the best way to reduce cybersecurity risk coming from a third party in general. And if you take the initiation phase, analysis at the beginning of the engagement and continuous monitoring after that, you have a very good, solid solution for third party security in general.
Great.
Absolutely agree with that. And I did come across an example of somebody doing almost exactly the opposite of that, where after they'd basically done their cursory checks, checking, yep, ISO 27001 tick, they then opened up access to a database by basically running a VPN tunnel between the two different corporate networks and then opening up full access to a supplier from the database. And that's a security nightmare looking for somewhere to happen for both organizations, in fact. And this is where, yeah, I completely agree. Just providing people with access to the data and the information that they actually need via the systems that are appropriate and fit for purpose is really important.
It's very important to highlight, there is always a confusion in the market. The fact that the vendor presents you with an ISO 27001 certificate doesn't mean that you are secured. And a lot of organizations basically say, okay, I see the certificate, then I'm done. No, it's only the starting point. You need to verify that the vendor remains in compliance, remains secure, and the security level that you observe is matching the kind of exposure and risk that you are creating there.
We've got time for one more question. And the highest rated question on Slido says, what can be done to address the shortage of cybersecurity resources and skills in the market? Funding is available, but companies can't hire fast enough. I think maybe Jay, would you like to take this one first?
Sure. There are always, 20 ways to skin a cat. So if you don't have people have master's degrees in cybersecurity related fields, you could start by training your existing workforce up with courses, 6-week courses. Harvard does them, all kinds of online education access. People do them and start building a higher base within your own organization. But people tend to look for help, consulting and employee help in their own backyards. And this internet thing has made us all global. You don't have to. You can get help from Israel. You can get help from Pakistan. You can get help from Japan. You can get help from all over the world at this point. And people, I think, should just broaden their perspectives if they can.
Charles, if I can add into that, as a security company that has large pen testing teams and security consultancy teams, actually getting resources is really difficult. We're obviously continually recruiting. One of the things that we did find, even though we use recruitment companies and various different things, they search through LinkedIn and do all these different aspects. One of the biggest things we learned over the last sort of 18 months, to be honest, I wish it had been a bit earlier, was actually to look at the inclusivity aspect and go into areas where we actually hadn't previously thought about and look to that to bring the skill sets out. And that has been beneficial. We still don't fully optimize that yet, but it has definitely been beneficial. We've also taken expertise in about how to word CVs and how to word job descriptions, because we know that there's certain things which is just the way that people's behaviors are. Some people need to identify that they can do everything in a job description before they'll apply. Some people will just look at 2 things and then apply. So you're missing out the whole aspect of it. We still haven't got it right. We're still really working hard towards it. But MD is, I would ask them to look at probably inclusivity, look at going into different areas of where those pots might be available to be able to bring in depending on the skill sets that you're looking at.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. That's us pretty much out of time. I'd like to thank our speakers, Alan, Kobe, Reuven, Jay, and Alan, for taking the time today for a fascinating conversation. I've been furiously taking notes on this, and so I find it very personally interesting, and hopefully the rest of the viewers now and in the future recording have too. Please continue to keep an eye on the London Stock Exchange Spark platform for more thought leadership content across a wide range of topics. Thank you very much.